The morning of December 16, 1944, brought a storm to the Ardennes that would forever change the nature of war. As American artillery thundered across the frozen landscape, the enemy, advancing in tight formations, was about to encounter something unlike anything they had ever experienced, an innovation so revolutionary that it defied all expectations. In the midst of the Battle of the Bulge, Colonel Oscar Alfred Axelson of the U.S. 406th Artillery Group made a decision that would transform the battlefield: to deploy the newly developed proximity fuse. This powerful new technology allowed artillery shells to explode in mid-air, raining down lethal fragments with uncanny precision. It was a breakthrough that multiplied the power of American artillery by a factor of 50. The German soldiers, battle-hardened from years of fighting on the Eastern Front, had no idea what they were about to face. The proximity fuse shattered the conventional laws of warfare, striking from above, leaving no place of refuge. The frozen forests of the Ardennes would soon become a deadly trap as the secrets of American innovation were unleashed. This decision would not only alter the course of the Battle of the Bulge, but would also mark a pivotal turning point in the way wars were fought. A battle that had already begun with a major surprise, Hitler's desperate offensive, known as Operation Watch on the Rhine, would soon turn into a brutal lesson in technological supremacy. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation. As the early hours of December 16th broke over the misty Ardennes, General Dwight D. Eisenhower's Allied forces were caught off guard. German forces, numbering 200,000 soldiers, 1,000 tanks, and 2,000 artillery pieces, had launched their final offensive. The objective was clear: split the American and British forces, recapture Antwerp, and reverse the course of the war. With the element of surprise on their side, the Germans pushed deep into the Belgian countryside, hoping to reach the vital port city of Antwerp. For the Americans, the situation seemed dire. Intelligence had failed to detect the massive German buildup, and many of the frontline units were either green replacements or weary veterans sent to this sector for rest. When the Germans broke through, they encountered relatively weak resistance. The 38th Cavalry Squadron, a small reconnaissance unit, was overwhelmed by the sheer force of the attack. The usual artillery could not stop the advancing German infantry and tanks. Colonel Axelson, facing what seemed like certain defeat, made a bold and controversial decision. Without waiting for authorization from higher command, Axelson ordered his artillery gunners to deploy the newly developed proximity fuses. This decision, which could have led to a court-martial, would instead prove to be the key to stopping the German assault. The shells exploded above the advancing German forces, sending fragments raining down in deadly bursts. Soldiers who had spent years on the Eastern Front, surviving artillery barrages, found themselves suddenly cut down in their foxholes, behind trees, and in ditches. They had never experienced a weapon like this. The battle, which had seemed lost, turned in an instant. The proximity fuses disrupted the German advance, creating chaos within their ranks. The Germans, accustomed to the predictable patterns of traditional artillery, found themselves facing an unpredictable and terrifying new weapon. The fuses, which exploded 30 to 50 feet above the ground, multiplied the lethality of the shells. No one was safe, not in the open fields, nor in the well-fortified foxholes. The American artillery had turned the battlefield into a killing field. As the German forces were stunned by this new type of fire, word quickly spread up the chain of command. General Eisenhower was soon aware of the devastating effectiveness of the proximity fuse. Within days, all restrictions on its use were lifted. Proximity fuses were now authorized for general ground combat, and American artillery units across the Ardennes were quickly re-equipped. The tide of battle had turned, and the Germans were facing a force they could not comprehend. By December 19, 1944, the tide had shifted dramatically in favor of the Allies. The American artillery, now equipped with proximity fuses, was raining down destruction on the German forces. The fuses, designed to explode at the optimal height above the ground, made it impossible for the Germans to find shelter. Even the dense forests of the Ardennes, which the Germans had hoped would shield them, became death traps. The proximity fuses, when detonated above the forest canopy, created a 360-degree kill zone, killing everything in its path, from soldiers to animals. In Bastogne, a pivotal moment in the Battle of the Bulge unfolded. Surrounded by superior German forces, the 101st Airborne Division, under General Anthony McAuliffe, held their ground against repeated assaults. The city was under siege, with German forces pressing in from all sides. The 463rd Parachute Field Artillery Battalion, using proximity-fused shells, provided crucial artillery support. Between December 19th and December 31st, they fired over 7,000 rounds. While not all were proximity-fused, the shells that were transformed the battle. German assault formations, advancing through the snow, found themselves decimated by exploding shells that rained down from above. The American artillery, with its precision and overwhelming force, became a psychological weapon as much as a physical one. German prisoners later reported that the sheer terror of the proximity-fused shells caused their units to break down before even reaching the American lines. The American forces, despite being surrounded and outnumbered, held fast, and the German advance ground to a halt. The siege of Bastogne would become a symbol of American resolve and ingenuity, as the proximity fuse proved itself as a decisive tool in breaking the German attack. On Christmas Day, German units attempting to cross the Sauer River were caught by the deadly precision of the American artillery. General George S. Patton, leading the Third Army to relieve Bastogne, would later recount this devastating engagement in his memoir, War as I Knew It. The German battalion, attempting to cross the river, found themselves caught between American fire in front and above, with nowhere to escape. Patton reported that when the firing stopped, 702 German soldiers were dead. It was a staggering loss for the German forces, and it underscored the power of the proximity fuse. But while the proximity fuse was turning the tide of battle, it came at a cost. The Americans were faced with a moral dilemma using this devastating weapon, which caused destruction on an unprecedented scale, brought both victory and tragedy. The men who fought in these battles would carry the weight of those decisions with them for the rest of their lives. As the battle for Bastogne raged on, the psychological and physical toll on both sides was immense. The Germans, who had expected to push through and break the American lines, were now on the defensive. The American forces, empowered by the technological advantage of the proximity fuse, had managed to hold their ground despite being surrounded. The artillery, now a weapon of unparalleled precision, became the cornerstone of the American defense. In the final stages of the Battle of the Bulge, the proximity fuse played a key role in forcing the German retreat. American artillery, with its ability to strike with such lethal precision, prevented the Germans from regrouping and recovering. The psychological impact on the German soldiers was devastating. Many of them had never experienced a weapon like this before. The proximity fuse, which seemed to anticipate their every move, shattered their resolve. Soldiers who had once fought with the belief that they could overcome any obstacle were now faced with a weapon that seemed impossible to defeat. For the Americans, the cost of victory was high. The Battle of the Bulge had claimed 19,000 American lives, with thousands more wounded. The proximity fuse had saved countless lives, but it had also taken its toll. The men who fought in the battle had witnessed horrors that would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The proximity fuse had made the difference between victory and defeat, but at what cost? The legacy of the Battle of the Bulge and the role of the proximity fuse would become a defining moment in the history of World War II. The weapon had changed the way wars were fought, and it had shown the world the power of American innovation. It had turned the tide of the war in favor of the Allies, but it had also marked the beginning of a new era of warfare, one in which technology would play an ever-increasing role. The Battle of the Bulge, which ended on January 25, 1945, marked the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. Hitler's last offensive had been repelled, and the Germans were now in full retreat. The proximity fuse, a secret weapon that had been developed in utmost secrecy, had played a critical role in the Allied victory. It had turned artillery into a weapon of unprecedented power, reshaping the battlefield in ways that would have been unimaginable just a few years earlier. The legacy of the proximity fuse extends far beyond the Battle of the Bulge. It was a symbol of the American industrial and scientific might that had helped turn the tide of the war. The fuses, produced at an astonishing rate, represented the convergence of American ingenuity and industrial capacity. Over 100 companies had contributed to the effort, and the resulting technological breakthroughs would have lasting effects on both military and civilian industries. The proximity fuse also marked the beginning of the technological age in warfare. It laid the foundation for the development of guided missiles and smart weapons, and it revolutionized the way wars were fought. The principles behind the proximity fuse, including radar and miniaturized electronics, would go on to influence the development of modern weaponry. Today, nearly all precision-guided munitions trace their origins back to the breakthrough of the proximity fuse. But for the veterans who had fought in the battle, the legacy of the proximity fuse was more personal. They remembered the fear and the chaos, the sense of helplessness, as they witnessed the devastation wrought by this new weapon. While the proximity fuse had been a decisive factor in the Allied victory, it had also left its mark on those who had used it. The psychological impact of wielding such a powerful weapon would stay with these men for the rest of their lives. As the war came to a close, the proximity fuse became a symbol of both triumph and tragedy. It had helped bring victory, but it had also shown the devastating cost of technological warfare. For the survivors of the Battle of the Bulge, the memories of the proximity fuse would remain etched in their minds forever. They had been part of something that had changed the nature of war, and they would carry that knowledge with them into the future. The Battle of the Bulge was a test of human endurance and willpower, not just for the soldiers on the battlefield, but also for those who had to carry the scars of war for the rest of their lives. In the days that followed the battle's conclusion, both Allied and German soldiers would find themselves reckoning with the true human cost of victory. The proximity fuse, with its ability to strike with pinpoint accuracy, had shattered entire units in moments. But as much as it had disrupted the German offensive, it had also left behind a trail of devastation, a silent testament to the price of innovation. Amid the wreckage of the Ardennes, the survivors from both sides were left with nothing but memories of their fallen comrades. Many of the soldiers in the American ranks were young men, some barely 20 years old, who had seen more violence in a few weeks than most men would encounter in a lifetime. As they advanced through the snow-covered forests, the sounds of gunfire and explosions seemed to blend into a haunting, eternal echo. And then there were the casualties, the wounded, the dying, and those who would never make it home. Each one carried a story, a family, a promise unfulfilled. The proximity fuse had changed everything, but it had also created new wounds, psychological as well as physical. Survivors who had witnessed entire platoons vanish under a hail of shrapnel, who had heard the screams of their comrades, who had fought with a weapon they couldn't fully comprehend, would return home bearing the weight of those experiences. And for the German soldiers, many of whom were teenagers conscripted in the final days of the war, the psychological toll was equally devastating. German prisoners later admitted that they had been so terrorized by the precision and power of the new American weapon that it shattered their morale. They no longer saw themselves as soldiers, but as victims of a force far beyond their understanding. One such soldier, captured in the aftermath of the battle, recalled how his entire squad had been obliterated by a single proximity-fused shell. "We couldn't hear it coming. We just saw our men, disappear," he said in a trembling voice. It was like the shell knew exactly where we were. For the German forces, the psychological blow was crushing. The technology that once seemed like a game-changer had turned into a harbinger of terror, one they couldn't escape from. The human cost was not only measured in bodies but in the broken spirits of those who survived. For every soldier who had lost a friend, every unit that had been decimated, the true cost of the battle could not be quantified. While the contingents, technology of war had advanced, the faces of war, the men who fought it, remained the same. The proximity fuse had changed the battlefield, but it had not changed the brutality of human conflict. For the men of the Battle of the Bulge, both the winners and the losers, the war was never truly over. The days after the Battle of the Bulge were a time for reflection, a time to honor the fallen and reckon with the price of victory. For many of the soldiers who fought in the battle, the memory of those who did not make it would live with them forever. Memorial services were held for those who perished on both sides. The cemeteries that sprawled across the Ardennes became hallowed ground, where the remains of young men who had died far from home were laid to rest. Though their lives had been brief, their sacrifices were monumental, and the lessons of their courage echoed through the generations. The families of those lost in the Battle of the Bulge were left to pick up the pieces of lives interrupted. Many of them had no idea what had happened to their loved ones until the letters and telegrams arrived months later. The proximity fuse, which had been heralded as a technological triumph, had also wrought countless unspeakable tragedies. Fathers, sons, brothers, and husbands, the victims of a weapon that had made death come from above, without warning. In the aftermath of the battle, families mourned not only the loss of their loved ones, but the fact that they would never truly know what had happened in the final moments of their lives. But there were also survivors, veterans, who returned home after months of fighting. The stories of these men would become the pillars of wartime memory, as they would go on to share their experiences in letters, speeches, and reunions. In later years, as the world sought to understand the implications of the proximity fuse, these men would carry the legacy of their bravery forward. They would tell the stories of how a single decision, Colonel Axelson's choice to deploy the proximity fuse, had altered the course of the battle, and, by extension, the war itself. One such veteran, now in his 90s, remembers the confusion and disbelief that filled the early morning hours of December 16th, when the German forces first encountered the deadly airbursts. "At first, we didn't know what hit us," he said in a recent interview. "It was like the sky itself was trying to kill us. We couldn't escape. The air was full of death." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "But we fought. We fought because we knew that every day we held on, we saved lives." The proximity fuse made all the difference. It wasn't just about killing the enemy, it was about surviving. Survivors like him would go on to become the stewards of history. They would pass down their stories to future generations, ensuring that the memory of the Battle of the Bulge and the proximity fuse's role in it would never be forgotten. For the families of the fallen, and for the soldiers who returned, the legacy of the battle was a reminder of the sacrifices that made victory possible. The Battle of the Bulge was not only a turning point in the war but also a pivotal moment in the evolution of warfare itself. The introduction of the proximity fuse into ground combat marked the beginning of a new era, one where technology would increasingly shape the battlefield. In the years following World War II, the lessons learned from this battle would resonate across military strategy, influencing the development of modern weapons and tactics. The proximity fuse's impact was far-reaching. As a weapon that could make its own decisions in real time, it represented a breakthrough in autonomous technology. This idea that machines could be designed to think for themselves and respond to changing circumstances would lay the groundwork for future innovations in guided missiles, drones, and even modern AI-driven systems. The principles behind the proximity fuse would influence the development of technology that continues to shape military operations today. But its effects were not limited to the battlefield. The production of proximity fuses in the United States during the war had been a remarkable industrial achievement. The fuses were manufactured at an unprecedented scale, with over 22 million produced by the end of the war. This feat of mass production, executed by a vast network of American factories, would serve as a model for future technological endeavors. The speed and precision with which the proximity fuses were made became a symbol of American industrial capacity, an ability to rapidly adapt and meet the demands of wartime. As the Cold War began in the aftermath of World War II, the lessons of the proximity fuse would be applied in the development of new technologies. The concept of precision weaponry, first introduced with the proximity fuse, became integral to both military and civilian technological advancements. From space exploration to missile defense systems, the legacy of the proximity fuse continued to influence the development of cutting-edge technologies. General George S. Patton, who had recognized the power of the proximity fuse on the battlefield, once remarked that it was the funny fuse that won the Battle of the Bulge for the Allies. He was right, its strategic value could not be overstated, and while the battlefield had changed forever, the lessons learned from the deployment of this weapon would extend far beyond the war. They would echo into the future, where technology would continue to shape the way nations waged war and sought peace. As time marches on, the memories of the Battle of the Bulge fade into the past, but the impact of the proximity fuse continues to be felt. For those who fought in that battle, the technological innovation was both a blessing and a burden. The fuses, which had been so crucial to their success, also carried with them a heavy moral weight. The ability to kill with such precision, without warning, had raised questions about the ethics of warfare. Today, veterans of the Battle of the Bulge are often the only living witnesses to the horrors and triumphs of that time. As they reflect on the war, many of them speak not just of the weapons and tactics used, but of the camaraderie, the friendships forged in the heat of battle, and the sacrifices that were made. They carry the stories of their fallen comrades, whose names will never be forgotten but whose faces have long since faded from memory. The proximity fuse, once a closely guarded secret, became a symbol of American ingenuity and resilience. It represented the spirit of those who fought in the war, those who had come together to face impossible odds and overcome them. The legacy of the proximity fuse is not just about the technology, but about the people who created it, the soldiers who used it, and the lives it ultimately saved. As the last surviving veterans pass into history, their stories remain a testament to the bravery and determination of those who fought in World War II. The proximity fuse, a tool of technological warfare, serves as a reminder that the greatest victories are often won not just on the battlefield, but in the hearts and minds of those who carry the memories forward.